Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. So yesterday we went through briefly the 10 Sefirot, the 10 attributes of the soul. We explained how intellect and emotions relate to each other, how they affect one another, and how intellect comes before emotions, and how this all relates to Ratzon, how it all relates to the will, and we discussed this in the realm of human conditions, or in order to understand a little bit where the place of faith is.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude. I need just some few minutes. I just am tired, but
No problem.
my condition there, so I need to.
Take your time.
Excuse me.
Take your time. Take your time. So, we discussed how this is all in the human condition, and how, based on this, where would you have the place for faith? And we explained that faith is different than emotions or intellect, because emotions and intellect are like an internal attribute of the soul. You internally, it's your internal revelation, or your internal condition. But so actually, emotions are the most important in that sense, because mostly you do what you have emotions for. Your actions are based on your emotions. Then we brought this example of the thief who prays to God before he goes to steal something. And that's weird, because if he believes in God, then why would he do something against God's will? And we explained because he has faith, but that faith is not doesn't have an internal effect on him. It's just hollows over him. So faith is not an emotion. It's something else. And we discussed how that. So if that's something else, is it something that is it needed? What is it needed for? If you can understand God and you can have a relationship with God based on your intellect, and your intellect will make you meditate and think, and that will bring you to have emotions towards God, to have the fear of God and the love of God. If you guys remember, we said these are the two wings of the bird. The love of God and the fear of God are the two wings of our actions, actions towards God, the keeping of the commandments. So how are those created? How do they come to be? To love God and to fear God, it needs a lot of contemplation. It needs to think about it and to meditate about it. You need your knowledge. You need your chokhmah, bina, dat. You need your wisdom, your understanding, your knowledge. And we explained in length what knowledge is. Knowledge is actually something that you feel strong for. You feel it has a relationship with you. And faith is something more detached. So then we finished off saying, okay, so then we have an answer, either of the following two ways. For the question of where is the place for commandment to have faith in God, we can give two answers. One answer was that actually the commandment to have faith in God doesn't mean to have faith. It means to have, it's a commandment that you need to contemplate and to think about God in order to come to emotions. So it's not really a faith, it's just the word faith is used, but it's really the synonym of faith is das, to know God. So it's actually not a commandment to have faith in God, but it's a commandment to know God and to get to know Him in order to have emotions for Him. Or a second answer can be, and this is where we stopped off yesterday, we finished section 2, is that there is a commandment actually not only to know God, but also to have faith in God. Why? Because whatever you can know of God is very limited. It's just that side, it's just that side of God that, or that part of the revelation of God, which is limited. It's just that part of God which is limited. But the part of God which is unlimited, that's and part of God, the revelation of God, which is ununderstandable. That for that you cannot use your mind. It's impossible to understand Him, but you should still have a relationship with Him. And with what attributes can you have that relationship with this side of God? And that's faith. And that was our second answer. So we actually answered our original question, what we started off with. But in order to get this a little deeper and to understand, so how does this work? How is it that a side of God you can understand, and there is a side of God you can understand, and there's a side of God you cannot understand? So in order to understand this is how the discussion is going to continue now. So the discussion will continue now about some very deep philosophy about what is really God. Actually, that's the best way to put it. So what is God, and what can we understand of God? That's one issue we're going to speak about. And another issue we're going to speak about is God logical? Is logic an essential part of God, or is logic something created? We discussed this at the first day, whether or not the logic of nature is a created phenomenon or not. So the logic itself, the fact there is logic, any logic, is that a created thing? Does God need to be logical, or is logic also a created phenomenon? So that's what we're going to discuss. So actually, it will be interesting because we spoke about the 10 attributes of the soul in order to understand, and we explained them in length yesterday, in order to understand where is the place of the attribute of faith. But these 10 attributes themselves can be also mirrored onto godliness. And we say that the same way the soul has 10 attributes, also God has these 10 attributes in him. So Kabbalah explains that when the Torah states that God created man in his image is actually mirrored in these 10 attributes. So the same way there is 10 attributes in our soul, we should know that there is these 10 attributes in godliness. And the question will be, are these 10 attributes in godliness essential? Are they an essential part of God, the way they are an essential part of us? Or are they something additional to him, which only come to be about once he becomes a creator? But him by himself, does he have any attributes or not? It's the same question as is God logical? Is logic an essential part of God, or logic is also a created phenomenon? So if you remember yesterday, just before we go into the depth of this, we said, when we asked the question, who are you? So if you can describe yourself now, you think about like a description, who am I? You will think of, let's say, a quick CV of yourself. So whatever you're going to state in this CV about is going to be things that describe you, but they describe you the way you relate to the world. You relate to the outside of you. Is there any description you can think of in your CV which has absolutely nothing to do with the way you are in the world, but it's just the way you are? You understand the question? So everybody now think for a second. Can you think of something that you describe yourself with, which is not in the context of me and outside of me, but just me? So in order to strengthen this question, if you would be just you, there would be nothing outside of you. So it would be a very happy situation.
No cosmos even?
No, nothing. No, nothing. Nothing. Would there be a way to describe you? Not really, because whatever you're going to say, it's going to be, you only can describe the way you relate to the outside of you. So then, if this is the case, then what is you? You as your essence. So whatever you're going to say, you can speak about your cognitive capacities, your emotional capacities. You can speak about your behavior, your habits, your speech, your thought, your action. But all those things involve an outside world. But if you speak about you, your essence, can we say that your essence is there without... can we describe your essence with any attribute without an outside world? It's going to be very hard, I think. And this is why it's the same question, well, obviously about a person to say, just think of yourself being by yourself. That's basically like saying you're God, because if you're a created phenomenon, then there is something outside of you, the thing that created you, right? But if you would be God, and you would be just you by yourself, then we can't really say that logic is part of you, because logic comes to have a relevance only when you have to make order of things. But there's things that you make order of, but if it's only you, then there's nothing to know. There's nothing to make logic of. And therefore, it's pretty problematic to say that logic would be an essential part of God. But then, if logic is not an essential part of God, then how does it come to be a part? Then how does it come into being? So actually the question is, in a deeper sense, if God, in an essential way, is just Him the way He is, without any description and without any logic, then with what tool does He create logic? You understand? So it's it's something you need to think a little more about. But this is the essential question, basically, of this whole, in my understanding, of this whole discourse. But first, now, when we start off, let's speak a bit about the description of God. Let's describe who God is. Let's get to know Him. So in the Rambam, Maimonides, he has a work which is called Shmoine Prokim LaRambam, the 8 chapters that the Rambam wrote. It's a philosophical work which is part of his commentary on the Mishnah. And here he brings up what's called the 13 principles of faith. Actually, you can find a short version of the 13 principles of faith in most of the Sidurim, most of the Jewish prayer books. It's because the editors of the prayer books made a short version of these 13 principles. You can find it in the Hungarian prayer book of Tfilat Shmuel. Judo Imakaiv. So whoever knows Hungarian, it's right after the morning prayers, and it lists in very short the animamins. I believe. You know, there is this animamin, that's 13 animamins, and some of them even were made into a song. Animamin b'emunah shleima, I believe with a complete faith, and you mention what you believe in. So you find it on page 103. It's easy to remember because it's 13 principles on page 103. Well, in the Chabad Sidurim, we don't have it because it's not a Chabad custom to say those, because you need to believe in them and not to say them. But most groups say this every morning after prayer. So they just want to remind themselves of the most basic principles of faith. And I don't know if you guys ever read them, but
I know it is.
you know it is. Okay, so if you know them, it's good for you. It's 13 principles that are the most basic foundations of faith in Jewish religion. Now, the first 5 of those differ from the last 8. Because if you look in the first 5, we're going to go through it. We're going to go through it soon, one by one. But basically, the first 5 speak about God, the believing God, and what type of God. So when somebody, the joke when somebody meets a rabbi, the rabbi tells him, if you're Jewish, you might want to put on tefillin, you might want to say a little prayer with the tefillin, and the guy tells the rabbi, oh, no, I'm not a believer, thank you. I'm Jewish, but I'm a believer. So the rabbi tells him, oh, that's not a problem. I'm also not a believer. So he tells him, what do you mean? You're a rabbi. How can you be a non-believer? So he tells him, no. The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. So basically, when you say, I believe or I don't believe, you have to describe what is belief. So what do you believe in or don't believe in? So that's why the first 5 are really a description of the God that we should all believe in. And then the next 8 are more practical, technical stuff, like that we should believe in prophecy, and we should believe that Moses is our greatest prophet, and we should believe that there is a punishment and reward, and we should believe in the coming of Messiah, and we should believe in the resurrection of the dead. It's all type of more technical type of principles of faith. By the way, you should not confuse those principles of faith with commandments, because some of these principles of faith are not a commandment. So we're having a discussion now about whether or not the belief in God is a commandment, but there's definitely no commandment to believe that Moses was our greatest prophet. There's no such belief. There's no such commandment. But it's a foundation of faith. If you're going to take it away, if you're going to say, well, Moses was not a prophet, he was just a smart man, then you're basically taking a foundation of the whole building and the whole thing falls apart. So for example, if you say, I don't believe in Shabbat, and so I don't practice Shabbat and I don't believe in it. So it's not nice you say that, but it doesn't make the whole Judaism fall apart. If you say that Moses was not a prophet and the whole Torah is just a made up thing, then there's no foundation for the whole thing. The whole thing is in the air. Same way, if you're going to say, I don't believe in God, you're taking away the most basic foundation of all. So you're not a religion anymore. It's a nice folklore or culture, but it's not a religion. So these are principles of faith. And the last 8 are more technical, but the first 5 are very essential, and they all are about the description of God. So actually, we're going to take these 5, the first 5, and we're going to show that it's really hard to say one without saying the other 4. Because logically, they are all interrelated. If you take out 1 out of the 5, logically the rest won't make sense neither. And that's why some of the opinions would say that these 5 are actually not 5, but 5 parts of 1. So it's really not 5 principles, it's 1 principle that entails 5 details. And what is the most basic one? So the most basic basic first one. So if you want to just take out, you have it here in Hungarian or what?
The fourth point. No.
No, not the fourth one. No, the first one is the one that everything is driven out. There you go. You guys can read the Hebrew. The rest of the guys will understand the English or the Hungarian. I'm sorry, I didn't bring you one. So let's just go to page 103. So the beginning of all of them is the same. I believe in a complete faith that that his name should be blessed. He's the one that creates and rules all the people, and it's only him and the one that does, that did, that will do all the things. He's the only doer. Okay, that's the first one. Second one is that he is Shehu Yachid ve'en Yachidus Kamoyu, that he is one, and there is nothing that can be compared to his oneness. The third one is that he doesn't have a body, and there's no way you can describe him. The fourth one is that he's the first and he's the last. There's basically nothing outside of him. The fifth one is that he is alone, and his name is alone, and there's nothing else to pray for. So these things all, if you read them just simply, they don't even seem like too deep, and they don't seem like, it's just different sides of the same coin. But we will see soon how they're all related to each other. And basically, they all... Whoa, what happened here? Okay, so they all have... they all come from the idea of God's oneness. God is one. So if God is one, that also means that this idea of God is one is that his oneness is unique. I hope this is how you write unique. It also means that there is nothing outside of him. Which means him being one doesn't only exclude that he's not two, there's no two of him, it also excludes, it doesn't only exclude having other gods outside of him, it also excludes actually having anything outside of him. There's nothing outside of him. It also means, and this is where we're going to get into our discussion, that there is no particles to him. Particles is the word? Halakim?
Parts.
So what is particle?
Particles of... It's like a particle is a part, but it's considered... What?
Chalkik. So no parts to him. Which means, when I say that there is parts to something, there can be parts to something when I say, let's say, a car. So a car is one car, but it's made out of multiple parts. What we are saying here is even more than that. No, actually there's 3 levels of parts, right? We have a class, this is one class, which is made up of 7 unique people. So it's 7 unique pieces make up one thing. This is definitely not God. Then there is a type of oneness when you have something which is one, which is made out of different parts, but that make one thing. And that is, let's say, a car. You have one car which has different parts to it, and those parts come together and they're one. But God is even more than that. It's not even one like one person. In one person, it's not like they took 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and they made one person out of it. These parts are all parts of one thing. It's not that the oneness is derived from the parts, but that the parts are derived from the oneness. You understand the difference? It's a stronger unity. A unity of one person is obviously much stronger than the unity of a car, right? A leg or a foot or an eye doesn't make sense outside of the person. It only makes sense once it's part of the person. So it's a much stronger unity. God is so one, so much one, that he doesn't even have parts to him. So if I say, for example, that God cannot be described, that should also mean that God cannot be described, even a part of him cannot be described. And that's a problem. Because if I say that even a part of him cannot be described, then how do I ever describe him? So, I have to say that there is no parts to him, because if I wouldn't say there is no parts to him, he wouldn't be ultimately one. So this is the type of things we're going to discuss now, and just let's go to the text. So, page 1 of section 3. So, section 3, yeah. Just the beginning of section 3. So, he mentions the 13 principles of faith that every Jew should believe in. And he says, of these, the 3rd line of section of the beginning. Everybody got it? Of these, the first principle, the existence of God, is of a primary importance, and the following 4 are an explanation of it. So the first principle is that there is a God and he creates everything, and everything else that comes afterwards is the description of this God, so that other 4 principles come out of the first principle. And this is why he says in the principle, in the parentheses, the author of Ikarim mentioned these 5 as one. Okay, jump now to the middle of the next page. The remaining 8 of Rambam's 13 principle that every Jew has to know include the explanations of the concept of the Torah, the divine origin, and the reward and punishment. So it's a different type of principles. The first 5 are the following. So, as I said before, the first 5 of principles are more essential. The second 8 are more particular into more like discussing the Torah is from heaven and its prophecy and reward, punishment, etc. So let's see now the first 5, the way he describes them here. You have to understand something. We're gonna read we read this here. It's simplified. So the way it is in the original text of the Rambam, it's much more complex. So he simplifies it in a philosophical way, and that therefore it's going to be easier for us to work from here. So the first out of the 5 is that he's mechuyav hametzius. I'm going to write those on the board because we're all going to discuss these. So the first one is mechuyav hametzius. So we mentioned this idea. The way I like to translate this is unconditional existence. So there is conditional existence, something that is dependent on something else. You exist because of something. His existence is unconditional existence. Is that unconditional? Unconditional. So that's the idea of mechuyav hametzius. We're going to get back to it in a second what that means. The second one is, we turn the page, is that he is true oneness. In Hebrew is Metziusay Matz. No. That She'echod HaEmes. I just want to say here when we speak about unconditional existence, but it says there's another expression we use, Metziusay Matzmusay. His being is from his essence. We'll get back to it in a second. The second one is that it's true oneness, echod emes. The third one is she'ein lo guf v'lo koyach beguf. He doesn't have a body, no body, or not even a part of a body, bodily power. So any description that you would relate to a body is not true for him. Well, you can ask then, okay, there's a lot of times you describe God in a certain way. He's angry, he's happy, he's friendly, he's not friendly. Well, it's going to be our discussion. So how can you describe God in any bodily way? But that's number 3. Number 4 is that he is not dependent on time. And number 5 is that he has infinite power. So, basically what is somehow I didn't do it. I'm looking at the English at the Hebrew once, and that's why I'm a little bit. So, ein lo guf v'lo koyach guf. That's 3. Ein lo yitolis bezman is 4. Shuiz Derech Yichedes Bilat Batach, infinite power is 5. Okay. So, any of these 5 that you're going to say cannot be if you don't say the rest of the rest of the 5. So you see it in 1. Okay? Why is this? So let's try to understand. Let's go. We can start from any of them basically, but let's start with the first one. Okay. So what we say is we want to understand what is God. What is the ultimate difference between God's existence? Hi. So what is the ultimate difference between God's existence and our existence? So the difference is what we described before, whether or not we are whether it's a conditional existence or an unconditional existence. So we briefly mentioned this at the first class. Well, I want to go back to it, and from there we will understand the rest. So basically, when I say something exists, whenever I say something exists, I can only say that it exists if I can give a description to its existence. If there's absolutely nothing I can say about its existence, then that thing practically doesn't exist. Right? Why? Because I wouldn't have any way to sense its existence if I have nothing to say about its existence, right? So anything you're going to say that exists, you're going to give some type of description of its existence. So you're going to say it exists by this and this means, right? It's tall, it's short, it's fat, it's skinny, it's old, it's young, it's ugly, it's beautiful. You're going to give some type of description, and I gave very simple descriptions. And most of these descriptions have to make sense in time and space, right? Time and space is like the most basic framework of the existence. So the idea of time and space as the most basic principle of existence also predict that the description, and that actually that any description predicts that the things that exist are finite. Because if they would be infinite, you wouldn't have a way to describe them. If you have a way to describe them, then they have to have some finite element to them, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to describe them. A description is always a description by the edges of the thing, by those edges that make it differ from the rest of the things, right? You actually draw its outlines. You say, this is where it starts and this is where it ends. It's black and not white. It's tall and not short. So you basically, when you give a description, you draw the outline, you draw the limitations of that thing. Now, if that means that every existence has limitations, every existence that we know has a limitations. So there are two things that we can derive from this. One is that if every limitation, every existence that we know has a limitation, it also means that any existence that has a limitation can be known. It also goes the other way. If every existence that we know has a limitation, and every existence that has a limitation can be known, that also means that anything that has no limitation cannot be known, and the only existence that cannot be known is something which doesn't have limitations, right? Which also means now, if we take this one step further, if every existence that we know has a limitation, it also means that every existence is finite. That means that if we put this in the framework of time and space, then no existence that we know has been there without a reason or without something to make it into coming. Understand? Because if everything that we know has practically a starting point and an ending point, right? Because there is a description to it, that means it differs from the rest of the things. There had to be something that made it differ from the rest of the things. There had to be a precondition before that the thing came to being. If that is the case, I have to say that in general, all the existence that we know had to have a precondition that made them to be being. But that thing that was the precondition has to be something which is unlimited, because if it's limited, then it's part of the equation of which we say it had to have a precondition. So only thing which doesn't need to have a precondition is a type of existence that is unlimited and unknown. Basically, so that's what we call God. And that's what we call mechuyav hametzius, which is unconditional existence. So once I say something is an unconditional existence, which is the first principle, I also have to say that it's not describable. So if you look at the rest of the five, that includes that it has no body or no bodily power. It includes that it's not independent on time, because if it would be dependent on time, it would be, again, finite. The being in the framework of time means that you're finite. And it also means that it has infinite power, and it also means that it's true oneness. What is the idea of true oneness? Well, that's basically the way I described it before, is that it's not one in a way that it's not two. It's not even one in a way that it's made up of many things. And it's not one even in a way that it's not made up of many things, but it has many parts to it. It's one in a way that it's undescribable, and it's homogeneously undescribable. So there's nothing of it that you can describe. Because if there is any part of God, or this infinite thing that you can describe, that already gives a description of the thing itself. Because you cannot say, I can describe a part of it, but if I can describe a part of it, then I somewhat describe the thing itself also. So you have to be echad emes means that it's not mukdar. How do you say mukdar?
Defined.
Not defined. It cannot be defined in any way.
Delimited.
Right. So the way we now explain this, you can see how these five things are fully integrated and interrelated, and you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have something which is truly one if it's not also an unconditional existence. And you cannot have something which is unconditional existence but dependent on time, and so on and so forth. Now, but the basis of all is this idea of unconditional existence, or the other description that we give for it is his being is from his essence. What's the idea of his being? Metziusoi matzmusoi. That's the way we describe this in another way. So what is the idea of his being from his essence? Is that when I say, what are you made up of? You will say certain things. The way I asked you in the beginning of the class, can you describe yourself? You're going to describe yourself in certain ways. Then all of these ways are things that have to do with the outside world and you. If you're going to say you're smart, it's your relationship with your cognitive capacities in making order of things around you. If you say you're a lovely person, it's again your way of your relationship with the outside world. And your existence is dependent on the outside world. You're an effect of something, and you're a cause of something else. You are not by yourself. You're a part of a larger picture. And that's fine, because everything, all the existences we talk about are finite existence, and they are conditional existence. They exist because of something else, which is not so by unconditional existence. And unconditional existence is something that when you ask, what does it exist by? So you will say it exists on its own. There's nothing to describe its existence. So when you say, okay, so who made this thing, and who made that thing, and who made that thing, and the final answer you come to is God. Who made God? It's not a question you can ask, because God doesn't exist by the description of it, or by it being dependent on something. It exists because it exists. There's another phrase in the Kabbalah about this. It says, it exists because it doesn't exist. So that's the only thing you can say about godliness. You cannot say it exists by something. You can only say it has to exist, and it exists because it exists. Right? So, if this is the case, I hope it was more or less understandable. If this is the case, then it means that we can see how these 5 things are interrelated. Okay, so we're going to read this now inside, and I hope that we will make sense of it the way I said it and not something else. And so we mentioned these 5 things, and now we are at page 3, at section 3. So, so to explain the concept of his true oneness, let's go now to this thing, because this is what really interests us. So again, we listed the 5. He mentions here that there's another codificator that adds a sixth principle to this. We're not going to deal with that now. But what interests us is this, that his true oneness. Right? What did we say? That true oneness means there is no parts to him. Basically the same idea. Where did I write down no parts to him? I didn't. There's no parts to him. So, what does it mean when I say there is one God? The idea of monotheism. It means that, it means in the simple sense, that, people believe in many gods. I believe just in one God. But in a deeper sense, one God is part of the description of God. Because if you would have 2, then it wouldn't be God. If there is 2 of something, right? That means they cannot be both finite, infinite, because then what would make them into 2? The reason why they are 2 is because one stops here and the other thing starts from there. If they would be both fully infinite, they would be everything. And if they are both everything, there's nothing to differentiate between them. So they both fully overlap each other. So that means that's the idea of one God. Now, if that's the case, just one second. I knew you were going to say something. If that's the case, then it means that when I say God is one, I'm actually saying He's the only existence. And I'm saying more than just Him, meaning He's the only existence, which means He's the only one true existence. Everything else is a conditional existence. But He is the only true existence, which is that its existence is from His essence. His existence is an unconditional existence. But if I say so, I also must say there's no parts to Him. Because if there were parts to Him, that would make Him, in a way, finite. Even if these parts are infinite number of parts. But then there is His essence, and there is the place of Him where there is parts of Him. So then basically He's not infinite. If you can break up something and you can pinpoint and say, this part of Him is this, and the rest is something else, then the rest also becomes finite, right? So therefore I have to say, there is no way to describe any part of God. But if there is no way to describe any part of God, how can you say that God knows, God understands, God loves, and so on and so forth? Yes.
Imagine we are in a two-dimensional plane, okay?
Yeah.
We are two-dimensional, okay? And we call the whole plane, the infinite plane, as God, okay? And imagine there are 2 parallel two-dimensional planes.
But why would we call the whole...
Because we live in the 2 dimensions.
Yeah, but why? I don't call the 3-dimensional universe God.
Just I want to have another.
Okay.
So for us, there is one God. But there still could be several gods because they live in a different plane.
This is very interesting what you're saying. Zoli, it's very interesting what you're saying, but it has nothing to do with God. It has to do with the universe. You can say, it's very hard for us to imagine how can there be another universe. Please try to imagine it by imagining living in a two-dimensional plane, and then you can see how in three dimensions you can have multiple two-dimensional planes. But this is exactly the point. When I say God can, I say God is everything, it doesn't mean that God is the everything that I know. It means God is indescribable. Its existence is not describable, not by two dimensions, not by three dimensions, not by multiple three dimensions, or not by 4 dimensions or 7 dimensions. Dimensions as dimensions are not tools with which you can describe Him. So God, so there's a very strong statement in the Talmud. The Talmud says, Hu mekoymoi shel olam, ve'ein ha'olam mekoymoi. He's the place of the world, of the universe, but the universe is not His place. Which means, everything that we know is God. But God is not everything we know. So even if you would know everything of the universe, you would have a full picture of the whole universe, and in your example, the multiple universes, you would still not understand God. And not because God is in a different dimension, it's because God is not a dimension. Dimension is measurable. God is immeasurable by definition, not because we can't imagine it.
Is it perhaps useful to say that when you say that there's no parts
To Him.
So the opposite, when we say no parts, so we're asking to think the opposite of parts. So it seems to me there's 2 ways to think the opposite. One way is to think in terms of wholeness. When you think in terms of wholeness, you're still thinking that there's potentially parts, they're just not really there.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm basically saying what you're saying, but
I'm sure, but I still don't understand
what I'm
it.
saying is that when we use the word parts, when we talk about echad, chelek, we talk
Right.
about part and a whole.
Right.
So the meaning of the word parts usually is contrasted with the meaning of the word whole.
Mm-hmm.
You have a part and a whole.
Yeah.
So when we say God is not parts, so your mind, the first temptation
That
of
it's
mind
not, that it's whole.
is to say that He's whole. That's one way to go. But the other way to go, which seems to be, is
Right. That's not the right way. The way you said it is not.
It's not the right way. The right way is to say that the entire concept and the entire distinction of
Parts and whole wouldn't fit
is
Him.
not useful.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. It's not that He has no parts, meaning that He's not the whole. And He is the whole. It's the idea that His wholeness is not something that can be broken up to parts. Anything that you have, things that we know, and I appreciate this way of looking at it. A thing that we know, even if there's only one of it, you can break it up to parts. Break it up to parts meaning you can describe different sides of it. But God is undescribable, even partially. Because if you would describe a part of it, that would mean that it's measurable. And if it's something is measurable, even just partially measurable, it's already measurable. If it's measurable, it cannot be infinite. If it's not infinite, then it cannot be mechuyav metzius, unconditional existence, because then its existence is not by its essence, but by the thing that you describe it with. So, that's the idea.
Doesn't this theory, how to say, contradict Torah?
Why?
Because God speaks.
Oh, that's our problem. It does contradict Torah. That is exactly our problem. If God is undescribable by essence, and I say that His parts are also undescribable, then and He's not limited in any way, then how is a revelation of God towards us work? It means we do describe Him then, and not only He speaks, we say He's angry, we say He's great, we say He has a lot of mercy, we say he has savlan, he has patience, So all these things are descriptions of God.
Yeah.
So what are we saying here? By the way, there's another question, which is a much more fundamental question, which comes out of this whole equation. And forget about God being describable. What about us? If we are describable and we exist, and by the way, when we exist, so where are we in this whole equation? We cannot be outside of him, because then it means that again he's finite. He's not infinite. If we are part of, you will say, yeah, we are part of him. Yeah, but we are describable. So then the only thing I can answer is that in truth we don't exist. So we don't exist. So it's not a problem with accepting him being undescribable. But then the question is, there's two questions here. Number one, if we don't exist, then we cannot come to the conclusion that he exists. So how do we start this whole equation? We exist. And because we exist in a finite way, we have to find the ultimate source of existence that has to be infinite. But if we don't exist, then I don't have to come to the recognition that there is something which is the ultimate source of existence, which is infinite. So then the whole equation falls apart. So it's like ma'agal shoteh, how you say, erdagikör. It's how you say it in English? A vicious circle where you come from one place to prove another place, but once you prove that, you disprove in a way the beginning. And it's a problem. That's issue number one. And issue number two, isn't it heresy to say that we don't exist? I mean, if we say we don't exist, then nothing matters really in this whole thing. And this is a very interesting thing. You know what the answer of Chassidus is on this?
Yeah.
You don't know, obviously. But the answer is that if we would, that this is the thing we need faith for. Because this question cannot be answered logically. Logically, we would run into this vicious circle. And we would say that we don't exist. And why do we say that we exist? Because it says in the Torah. So we don't need the Torah to say that God exists. We need the Torah to say that we exist. And that's why the Torah doesn't start with saying, hi, I'm God. It starts with saying, you guys exist, I created you. It's an amazing chidush, how you say. It's an amazing novelty of Hasidic philosophy. The whole idea of faith is not for God, it's for our existence. And basically, in a way or another, this is what it's going to say here too. The problem is not to know God, that there is a God. The problem is to understand, is to believe that this God has a relationship with us because we exist. And here comes the problem really, because it's impossible to understand if God is really infinite, then how is there finite parts to it? And we say, just like Zoli pointed out, that God does have finite revelations to it. And that revelation has to do with us. It has to do ultimately with our existence. So this is a good question, a very good question, and there's no real logical solution to it. And here comes in the idea that Chassidus is as I mentioned in my introduction class, is a Kabbalistic mystical philosophy. It's philosophy. It works with logic, but there are parts to it when you say, this is the matter of faith. We say it because this is the way it says in the Torah, not because it makes sense. Okay. So now, let's go and read a little bit. Let's go about Echod Emes, the true oneness. This is the issue we are tackling here on page 4. Page 4, line 4. To explain the concept that he is true oneness, that he is not a composite of any powers, heaven forbid. Meaning, it's the way Professor Kegel explained, he's a whole, but not in a way that he's made up of different things. So he's not a one which is made up of different powers, but simple in other simplicity. So it's this idea of simpleness is a synonym for his oneness. So oneness is no parts, unity, and simplicity. So this idea of simplicity, usually in a human context, it's used as a negative, pejorative description. You're a simple guy, you're not too smart, you're simple. But in godliness, when I say this is the ultimate simplicity is a positive description. Because all I'm saying, he is infinite. The only thing which can be ultimately simple is infinite. Something which is undescribable. Anything you're going to describe is not simple because it has many colors to it. The way with which you describe him. But God, who is one in the totality of oneness and the totality of unity and the totality of being a whole without being broken up to parts, he's also the ultimate simplicity. And this is why we're going to get to the questions of Zoli. The concepts of God's simplicity caused the philosophers to raise questions with regard to the titles that we must ascribe to him. So the Torah describes him and we describe him with different titles. If he is the totality of simplicity, how can you describe him with anything? For example, that he is wise and knowing. Let's turn the page. And which we find stated in the Torah. So you asked the Tzemach Tzedek's question. For if he possesses such powers, wisdom, they are incremental to his essence. So then how does it work? There is his essence, which is fully simple and the ultimately one, and with a fullness of oneness. And then there is the things you describe of him. So you're breaking him up to two parts. There is his essence, and there is the parts of him which you can describe. So he's not one. He's not fully infinite. You understand? It's a huge problem. And so there's two answers we're going to give here in this section to this question. Both answers have solve a part of the problem, but raise another problem. So first we're going to have the answer of the Rambam, Maimonides, and then we're going to bring Rabbi Lev from Prague, the Maharal mi Prague, who gives a different answer. And it will be a different answer because Rabbi Lev pushes back on the Rambam and he says his answer is not good. So first, what the Rambam says is called Hu Hamada Hayodeya V'Hayadua. So Mada Yodeya Yadua. So, which would mean he is the knowledge, he is the knower, and he is the known. So practically would mean in a normal circumstance there is the person that knows, there is the tool of knowledge, and there's the thing that you know with the tool of knowledge. So you broke it up to three things, right? So the Rambam says like this. You have a question. Your question goes like, let's describe now the question which we had and recap it a little bit. So we said, what's the problem with saying a description about God? That you break him up to parts, right? There is his essence, and there is its description. Now, anything that you describe, give me any description you describe God with. All of these descriptions are ultimately in the relationship of between God and its creatures. So it's between God and the things so-called outside of God, right? The essence of God and the realm outside of him. So the Rambam says, let's take the highest level of these descriptions. And that is logic and knowing. So what is the problem with knowing? If I ask you, does God know anything? You say, yeah, sure, he knows. Not only anything, he knows everything, right? That's how we describe him. He's the ultimate knower. He knows everything. You cannot hide from him. That's a very basic idea of believing God, right? You cannot hide from God, and he knows everything. So he knows everything. So, but if I say he knows everything, then I must also, that include a pre-assumption that there is him and there is the thing that he knows. And there's also the tool of knowledge with which he knows with. So you're breaking the up existence to many parts. There's also another issue here, that if I say he knows, I also say that there are things outside of him, and I also say those things that he knows and the knowledge with which he knows the thing. But I also say that he is different after he knows than before he knows. So he changes. If he changes, that means that he is again not infinite, because if it would be infinite, it cannot change. So what does the Rambam say? The Rambam says, yeah, this is true if you say that there is three parts. There is the knower, the knowledge, and the known. Let's try to imagine this is all one. So he knows, but not with a knowledge which is outside of him, but a knowledge which is part of him. It's not something you could really understand, because the idea of knowledge is that there is an essence, there is an essential thing, and there's something else, and it gets to know that something else, and that changes that essential thing. But a little bit like we know ourselves, a little bit. Even in ourselves, this is not true, because in ourselves we change, and that's why the things that we know ourselves. Like I know how I'm going to, let's say, for example, I know I'm going to respond to this like this, right? So there is me, and there is my future me. So it's something. The reason why I know is because there is a change. So and therefore the example is not a real example, but just for the sake of the example, he says, imagine like the way you know yourself. You don't know something which is outside of you. You know something which is part of, which is you yourself. But let's take it even to a deeper level. Him, his essence, his knowledge, the tool of the knowledge, and the thing that he knows is really all one. So there's no question. That's what the Rambam says. Does it sound right? Somewhat, but not really. You don't like, Leo doesn't like it.
It's not logical in any way. So that's okay.
Yeah, so what does the Rambam say? Yeah, he doesn't need to be logical. But still, there's a problem here. I mean, if you say knowledge, it's already a description. And this is why the Rabbi Lev will say, no, this doesn't make sense, man. Because if you say, all right, you say it's all part of him, but then you break him up to parts. You say there is him, there is his knowledge in him, and there is the known thing in him. So it's all in him, but it's all parts of him. If it's parts of him, you're already describing parts of him. So you solve the problem of him and outside of him, but you didn't solve the problem of him in him himself. So you end up with the same issue. So what does Rabbi Lev say? He says, no. So really, in essence, he doesn't know. There's nothing to know. Because in its essence, it's just essence. This whole thing of knowledge is a created phenomenon. The same way we are created, knowledge is created. And so it doesn't know on the level of his essence, he doesn't know. Because if you would say on the level of his essence, he knows, then you would again describe him to him and to his knowledge. Therefore, this whole idea of the same question you have about yourself, your existence, is the same question for the knowledge. Knowledge is a created phenomena. Same way you are created, that's created. You might end up asking, wait, but how do we exist? Well, for that, we're not discussing that. That's the answer we gave. Finally, you can't answer that. It's because it says in the Torah. So, but the idea is it's a created phenomena. And that's really crazy, because that means, to answer our question, that logic is not an essential thing. Logic is a created phenomenon. So God is illogical by his essence, and not in a way that his logic is higher than our logic. Like Zoli said, like it's a different dimension. There is no dimensions there. Logic doesn't make sense by him. That's funny to say, but the idea of logic is when there is parts, you make order of parts. But in him there is no parts, so there's no logic. It's a little hard to get hold of this, but this is basically the discussion between them. So let's see this inside. So what does he answer? First the question. So, the answer. To resolve this difficulty, read on middle of page 5. To resolve this difficulty, Rambam states in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah that the Holy One, blessed be He, knows His truth and knows it is as it is. He does not know it with the knowledge that is outside of Him, as does our power of knowing, for we and our knowledge are not one and the same. With regard to the Creator, by contrast, He, His knowledge, and His life are all one from every side and direction, and in every manner of unity. For were He to be alive with a life force, and know with knowledge external to Him, there would be many gods. He, His life, and His knowledge. He calls His life the thing which is known. So would be Him, the thing that He knows, and the knowledge with which He knows it. So you would break Him up to parts. There would be parts. God would be made up of 3 parts. I mean, does that sound familiar with you? For you? These 3 parts of God from a different religion? All right? This is the problem. It's a major problem. If I say that there's parts, if I say that they're all God, it's already a problem of heresy. If I say there is parts to Him, because then I say, well, there is this face of God and that face of God. There is the Mother and the Son and the Father. They're all God. What's the problem? They're all God. Yeah, but if you say there is an essential face to God, then you're describing Him. If you're describing Him, it's not infinite. So you have a problem. That's why we reject this idea, not just on the level of Christianity versus Judaism, any level of description of God. So this is the idea. So this is not so. Instead, He is one from every side and direction, and in every manner of unity. Thus one must say, He is the knower, He is the object of knowledge, and He is the knowledge itself. This is a major theme. Hakol echad, it's all one, as he says on page 7. Now, the Rambam realizes this is what Leah realized. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, you're playing with words. What does it mean? He knows it with his own himself. Like, what are you saying? It's knowledge by description is, there is me, then there's the thing that I know. Even if I'm talking about myself, I'm talking a different part of myself. So there's my inner self, and the thing more external in me, which I get to know. So it doesn't make sense to say, no, it's all one. So there is no power within our mouth to take this statement, nor within our ears to hear it, nor with our mortal hearts to comprehend it thoroughly. So the Rambam says, yeah, you're right. It's not understandable, but that's the way God is. It's not an understandable thing. So this
What about the Sfirot?
Yeah, same question.
Didn't just spend last class talking about God's attributes?
That's the problem.
And his parts?
That's the problem. That is the same issue. So here comes the issue. Are the Sfirot an essential part of Him? Well, I can't really say that they are an essential part of Him, because if they're an essential part of Him, you're breaking Him up to parts. So I must say the Sfirot are also a created phenomenon.
But why does God create a phenomenon like that?
And instead of what? Why does He create it?
If He can't be understood, then why does He even try?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a question that's raised by Chassidus. So the last question is like this. Why do I need Sefirot in order to create the creatures so He could be understood when ultimately you cannot understand Him? So let Him just be the way it is and create things that will never understand Him. Very good question. You know what the Chassidus answers to this? Chassidus says that indeed you're right. The only reason why He yet did do it so is in order to give us a chance to not only to have faith, but also to have knowledge of Him. Although that knowledge is not true, not a true knowledge, because you only know a created phenomena of Him, but at least if you wouldn't have that, everything would be just based on faith, and that's not an internal service of Him. Right? What did we say yesterday? In order to have an internal service of Him, meaning to love God or to fear God, you need to understand what you love or you fear. But I cannot understand Him, so I will never have love and faith and fear to Him. That's why God created the Sefirot, and you see Him also through the Sefirot, so you get to love Him or to fear Him.
It still sounds like a part of
And then the question is, okay, but then the Sefirot, if they are part of him, then again you're breaking him up to parts. And that's a good question. So that's a general question about creation as well. But what we end up saying, let me explain. It is a question, even if I say that God created things, how can he create things? Then where are these things? They cannot be outside of him, they have to be inside of him. But if they are inside of him, then again you break him up to parts. It's a question. But the question would be much stronger if I said there are essential parts to him. You understand the difference? So if I say Sefirot are essential part of him, that means he's essentially something that can be broken up to parts. And that's a huge problem. That's for sure heresy. So what do I say now? On the essential level, there's no parts to him. On the created level, there is parts to him. So Sefirot are not an essential part to his existence. It's just a created phenomena.
But the fact that you divided it to essential and creative are two parts.
Exactly, but it's not an essential part. You know the difference?
Yeah.
But your question will be good because, so what is the, okay. Yeah, I'm saying ultimately there is no answer to the question. Ultimately, because if you would have an answer to a question, you would understand part of God. So, and that we cannot say. But the simple answer to your question is that in the true level of existence, there is no parts. So on the true level of existence, we don't exist, and nothing exists. Just him. Without parts, without Sefirot. The level where we say that there is existence and then there is Sefirot is just an external, conditional level. So we cannot say we don't exist, although, and so logically, if it would be just based on our logic, we had to say that nothing exists and that nothing is God. But since we are believers in Torah, we have to say that we do exist, and if we do exist, we'd say the same idea about the Sefirot, that they also do exist. How is it so? We don't know, but one thing we know, our existence is not a true existence. It's a conditional existence. And this is the discussion here. The discussion is, him, on the level of true existence, there's no parts to it. He's Echad Emes, he's the only one true thing, which has no parts to it. So the Sefirot are not his part. And his knowledge is not his part. Knowledge is a created phenomenon. Now, there's another question that I have, that I didn't see here, and that you could go further and you could ask. If he created the Sefirot, what did he create the things, what did he create the Sefirot with? Right? If there were no parts to him, then how can there be created parts of him? There had to be an essential part of him which wanted to create the Sefirot. But then you already say, then there is him and his will for something else. Him and his will would be two separate things. And if I say that, I'm running into the same problem. I just lifted up the problem to a higher level. And I don't know. I guess there's a certain level you have to draw the line and say, okay, stop here. Because you could take this forever. Why can you take it forever? Because you have to understand one thing. Limitation and inlimitation and finiteness and infiniteness are contradictory by essence, by description. So on one hand, when I have finite things, I must say that there is an infinite. But if I say there is infinite, there cannot be finite things. And this is an incomprehensive contradiction, which is actually part of the incomprehensiveness of the unlimited, of the infinite. And the same way I cannot understand the infinite God, I cannot understand how these two things can work together. That's why we call, in the words of the Kabbalah, we call God Nimna HaNimnois, the possibility of impossibleness. It's just by definition had to have the inclusiveness of both things, of infinite and finite. Okay, anyways, we're getting a little, I hope we're able to come down to here. But anyways, that's the issue. Okay, so that's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says it's an essential part of him, knowledge. He holds that the Sefirot, at least on this level, is essential to him. How can it be? I mean, if he knows, that means that there is something to know, and that there is the knower, and there is the knowledge, and you can break it up to parts. No, it's all one. It's one thing. Now, look on page 8. It says, the sages of the Kabbalah hold true, acknowledge the truth of the Rambam statement. They say it's true. As Ramak writes in Pardes. Ramak is Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who is a Kabbalist in the times of Arizal. And even according to the Kabbalah of Arizal, this view is accepted. But only in regard to the enclosement of God's infinite light. Through many tzimtzumim, we'll get to this idea of what is tzimtzumim, but not in the realm of the spiritual existence above Atzilus, which means, I'll explain. They say, yeah, you're right, but on the most essential part of God, you cannot say this. And when we come to the most essential part of God, there is no description of Him, and therefore you can't solve this problem by saying there is Him and there's His knowledge and the thing and the thing He knows and it's all one. No. On that level, there's nothing. Okay, I think we'll have a little break here.